Burkle, proudly representing the people of New York State's 25th Congressional District in the House of Representatives. During her tenure in Congress, Anne Marie was a strong conservative leader who tirelessly worked towards the goals of smaller government, fewer taxes, and greater individual freedoms. John Fund is a senior editor for the American Spectator and a contributor to Fox News. He is currently writing a book on the American election process. He is a former editorial board member and columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Michael Ramirez is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner and senior editor and the editorial cartoonist for Investors Business Daily. His work is reprinted in such publications as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, U.S. News, and he is featured on the website of townhall.com. Tucker Carlson is a co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller. He is also a frequent contributor on Fox News. Mr. Carlson has hosted a number of different nightly news programs on various networks, including CNN's Crossfire, as well as several shows on MSNBC and PBS. One of the media's wittiest and most entertaining commentators, Mr. Carlson brings his informed viewpoints to discuss politics in America. Please welcome our next panel.
All right. I have been, first of all, good morning. I hope you're plenty caffeinated. I've been tasked with opening up this panel with some opening remarks, but it dawned on me as I was thinking this through that we have such an august panel that anything I say would just be noise. So I'll keep this incredibly crisp, which is not something I almost ever do. But I would just note this, that we're going to talk through what happened in the 2012 election. And I would say in doing that, we're fighting against the basic human instinct not to re-examine painful events. But I have noticed, and doubtless you have too, that all successful organizations force themselves to answer the most basic questions like, why did we fail? What happened? The military first among those, in order not to repeat the mistake. So each one of our panelists will get up and speak for 7 minutes, and then we will have a roundtable conversation in which we get to the nub of what happened and suggest ways to prevent it from happening again. So with that, I want to introduce the great Michael Barone, who knows more about politics and congressional districts than any living American. Out of 309 million Americans, he knows the most. Here he is.
Number one of 309 million Americans. Well, thank you very much, Tucker, and it's nice to be here. And to follow Paul Ryan. I'm a numbers guy. I like to look at the election numbers, and I can't think of anything more fun to spend an evening than to stay up at night and draw in with, I use red for Democrats and blue for Republicans, the county percentages for each candidate and so forth. There's nothing like that, and when you have a new election to crunch, even one when your candidate lost, it's something interesting. One of the things that struck me about this election, the 2012 election, is that in many ways it resembles the 2004 election 8 years before. In both cases, you have an incumbent president winning with 51% of the vote. He's opposed. He wins in 2004 by a 51-48 margin when you round off the percentages, and in 2012 by 51-47. The opponent in both cases is a rich guy from Massachusetts, although they obtained their money in different ways. I'm reminded of a comment that Margaret Thatcher made on the floor of the House of Commons, though I think I've got it slightly wrong. But she said basically there are 4 ways to make money. You can inherit money, you can make money, you can marry money, and you can steal money. And the right honorable gentleman has done all 4. But in this case, but there was one big difference between the 2004 and the 2012 election. and that was turnout. Turnout is kind of hard to gauge initially from an American election, because in the state of California, where public employee union members count the ballots, it takes 5 weeks for them to count all the ballots. And since they're about 12% of the country, we don't get the final turnout figures for quite a while. It takes 5 weeks in California. In Brazil, they do it in 5 hours. But after all, Brazil is a far less primitive place than California. The turnout was different. If you look at George W. Bush in 2004, he won 11.5 million more votes, more popular votes than he won 4 years before. That was an increase of 23%. John Kerry also won 16% more votes than Al Gore had won 4 years before. There was a big increase, and that was, I think, a measure of enthusiasm, positive enthusiasm for Bush, negative enthusiasm on the part of the Democrats. That represented a huge increase in turnout. In this election, Barack Obama received 3.5 million fewer votes than he received 4 years before. That's a 5% decrease in votes. Mitt Romney received about 1 million more votes than John McCain. It was commonly said and reported that he received fewer popular votes than McCain. That's because of the delay in the California and some of the other West Coast states in reporting their results. But when the numbers finally came in, he did. Obama clearly benefited from a superior micro-targeting and turnout effort, where they, building on what the Bush campaign had done in 2004, and then the substantial advances that the Obama campaign made on that in 2008, and working through that 4-year period to 2012, they used consumer preferences and things of that nature to identify both strong and wavering Obama voters. And then they used personal contact to get in touch with them, with a message geared towards the voters' propensities. It was a sophisticated effort. Obviously, Republicans need to make substantial advances over their procedures in 2012 if they hope to win any close election. You can see the results in the 12 target states, most of which had turnout increasing, even though turnout nationally was down 2% and down in most of the non-target states. They turned out black, Hispanic, and gentry liberal voters. Gentry liberal is term my friend Joel Kotkin, think Nancy Pelosi, San Francisco, and you have the idea. So I think, in a sense, I take the 2012 election result as a kind of, as less of an enthusiastic endorsement of Barack Obama and more as a grudging acquiescence in his presidency. But on the Republican side, one has to say that the Republicans did not have, Republican-leaning voters did not have the advantage in comparative balance of enthusiasm that they had in the 2010 off-year election. That simply was absent in sufficient numbers. I don't believe that the Obama campaign actually met their numbers. That is to say, I don't think they turned out as many people as they thought might be necessary to win. But they did turn out as many people as it turned out to be necessary to win, and to win Florida with its 29 electoral votes by 1% of the vote. One of the interesting things about 2012 is at the presidential level, the numbers look like a fair lot like 2008, particularly in the target states, reflecting the comparative advantage that the Obama campaign had in turnout. As you get down the ballot, the numbers look increasingly like 2010 with that kind of Republican advantage. Republicans managed to boot some Senate races that they ought to have won, and as they did in 2010, and so lack a majority in the Senate, which is led by the philosopher Harry Reid. But they maintained, by and large, their strength in the House of Representatives, losing only about 8 seats. And their position in state legislatures was very strong. That position that they had built up in 2010. They lost legislatures in Maine and Minnesota, but by and large kept legislatures that they'd won in 2010 and had the kind of advantage that they haven't had in state legislatures since the 1920s. So we have 25 states that have governors in both houses of the legislature controlled by Republicans. They're not just small states, they have 53% of the nation's population versus I believe it's 13 states with Democratic governors and legislatures, 21% of the nation's population. So let me just leave you with a final number out of the exit poll. The electorate that reelected Obama, when asked whether government should do more to solve problems or whether government is doing too many things better left to businesses and individuals, 52% government should doing too many things, 43% government should do more. That's in line with the trend that we've seen for the last 30 and 40 years in response to general questions of this kind. That doesn't mean that voters resolve every policy difference in favor of the Republican or conservative position, but it does mean that I think that we are right to judge that even with an Obama campaign-engineered electorate, the basic tenor of American voters is not a belief in greater government. Thanks.
Huh. Thank you, Michael. That was reassuring. And now I want to bring up someone who has achieved the near impossible, getting elected to the Congress from New York State as a sincere, out-of-the-closet conservative, and that experience may provide real lessons for the rest of us. The Honorable Anne Marie Buerkle joins us.
Thank you all, and good morning. It's an honor to be here with all of you this morning. Thank you, Tucker, for that kind introduction. And yes, it's true. There are conservatives in New York State, and we are proud to be there. Before I begin my comments this morning, I would just like to ask all of you to pause and remember and keep in your thoughts and prayers the men and the women who fight to keep us safe so that we can be here this morning. We thank them, we thank our veterans, and we thank all of our military for their service. As all of you know, 2012 was not a banner year for Republicans and/or conservatives. And as we reflect on the 2012 election, I want to just talk about a couple of things. First of all, what we know. We know very well now that we were beat soundly at both the social media and the ground game of Barack Obama. Compare the RNC's phone banks to the sophisticated plan of social media from Barack Obama, and you begin to understand what the Republican Party was up against. The other thing we know is that, and as Michael just mentioned, turnout. Republicans lacked enthusiasm. They lacked energy. The discussion about why that is, that's for another day. But for right now, we know in my own county, Barack Obama won in a county, in a town that had a 20% Republican enrollment favored. Barack Obama won that town. So we need to understand and we need to look at why that happened and why we did not energize the Republican voter. What you may not know about the 2012 election, which I think really is something to understand, was that, and I look at my case, but in talking with all my colleagues who lost, the campaigns that were run against us were national campaigns. So my opponent was virtually muzzled. He had an opportunity to debate me 8 times, chose only to do that twice, and was virtually silent during the campaign. The campaign was run by the DCCC, the Teamsters, SEIU, Michael Bloomberg, George Soros' son, you name it, they ran the campaign. And what they did was, and this is a lesson for Republicans to understand what they're up against, they employed the use of fear. Fear. And as you well know, the war against women was first and foremost in their whole platform in running against someone like me. So I want you to think about this just for a moment. I am a woman who graduated from high school in the 60s. I am the proud mother of 6 children, 4 of who are girls, 13 grandchildren, 4 of who are granddaughters. I graduated from law school at the age of 43 after I had my 6 kids. First woman to ever hold the seat in Congress from my district. And yet thank you, what they portrayed me as was someone who was anti-women. Now, it is laughable, but they did it successfully, and they did that by employing fear tactics, by making the voters afraid of what I would do, and that's so significant. The Democrats are employing behavioral psychologists, and the Republicans don't understand what they're up against. So they employ fear and they employ guilt. Those of us who are successful, they want to make us feel guilty, and those are two important, I think, very important facts that the Republican Party needs to get their arms around. So really the question this morning is, where do we go from here? What are we going to do about this situation in this last election? Number one, first and foremost, the Republican Party cannot be afraid of change. In fact, if they don't embrace change, if they don't understand that they need to get away from the status quo, the party will become extinct. They really have to learn how to inspire the American people, how to tap into that human spirit. And with all of the respect that I can muster for the party, they have to understand that the days of the good old boy party, the days of the establishment Republicans are forever gone. Women, minorities, Latino, African Americans, in fact, all Americans are looking for a party that inspires, a party that gets that human spirit going. Just think about what Rand Paul did last week in his filibuster. He inspired the American people, the millions of tweets, the excitement that one single act generated. That's what we need to do more of, and that's what the Republicans need to understand. The Republicans need to embrace these groups of people and make them understand that they are a vital part of the party, and we cannot be courting minorities or courting the African American vote or courting the women's vote just around election time. These groups are vital parts of the Republican Party. They need a party that they can look to, that they can be excited about, and the Republican Party needs to change its ways and embrace all of those groups as a part of the American fabric and what they will need to do to become successful. The other really important thing, and what I feel so passionate about, is that you'll hear many talking about what the Republicans need to do to win elections in this country. And one of the things you hear is we need to moderate. We need to move more to the center. We need to abandon our conservative principles. I believe that that's absolutely the wrong way to go for the Republican Party. The strength of the Republican Party depends upon our conservative principles. Those principles are the essence of what connects us to the American people. That is America, those conservative principles. That is consistent with our founding fathers. That is what makes this nation the greatest nation ever. Now is the time for us to really emphasize and make every American believe that our beliefs will make this country better. We are a party for all people. We believe that the greatness of this nation doesn't lie in that big, bloated bureaucracy in Washington. The greatness of this nation lies in every individual American citizen. That's what makes this country so unique. That's what makes this country the greatest nation. We need to distinguish ourselves from the middle and from the progressive left. We need to emphasize the individual, emphasize personal freedom, emphasize smaller government. And that is the way we will turn this economy around. That is how we will get this nation back on track. We're not going to settle for $1 trillion of debt. We are responsible. We want to make sure that our kids will get a better America than we were handed. Now is not the time for us to apologize for being Republican and/or conservative. We should embrace those principles. We should be proud of those principles. That's right. And in fact, when we do that, We embrace the principles of Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, consistent, principled conservatives. That's what this party is about. We can't move to the center. We need to be solid and we need to be firm in what we believe in and what we stand for. In doing so, and I'll end on this note, by adhering to our conservative principles, that is how we will win elections. And more importantly, and the reason all of you are sitting in this room today, is we will have a better United States of America. Our children and our grandchildren will have access to more opportunities than we had. And we will hand off to them a better place, a better country, a country that's not laden with debt, a country that has a clear direction. That's what our legacy should be. So I'm so pleased to be here with all of you this morning because I know you love and you care for this country. And I thank you for all you do for the conservative cause. May God bless all of you who love this country. May God bless our military. And may God bless the greatest nation in the history of the world, the United States of America. Thank you.
Well, it's possible there's someone in America who's covered Republican politics longer at a higher level than John Fund has, but I don't know who that person would be. So we are really blessed to have his analysis of what went wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, John Fund of the American Spectator.
And National Review, and thanks to all those Fox viewers out there. Tucker, I think you prematurely put me on the agent scrap heap, but that's okay.
Are you kidding? I respect authority and age.
No, I'm teasing. And Tucker, I have some fine words for your publication in my talk.
That's the spirit, John.
Look, I knew CPAC audience had some unfinished business from the 2012 election. When I came here yesterday and at 3 o'clock there was a panel called "Should We Shoot All the Political Consultants Now?" I'm here to tell you I don't think we should go that far. I'm a compassionate conservative in that respect. But there is some explanation that needs to be made, and that's why I think we all should understand something that has changed in American politics. You know, it used to be candidates would come and say, I want to run government like a business, which was very unrealistic because government is not a business. It certainly doesn't run on business principles. It probably can't. It can be made more efficient, but it's not going to be run like a business. But I'll tell you what has become a business in America. It's politics. There are an awful lot of people on both sides of the aisle who derive a very good income from politics, and the amount of money in politics is vastly larger than when CPAC started 40 years ago. So, one of the principles of conservatives is accountability and performance-based results and judging people by their results. Well, for the consultant community, I don't think that's always been done in recent years. I think Democrats and liberals have done a far better job of, shall we say, putting the consultants who don't work, who don't succeed, into the minor leagues for a while until they can prove themselves again, whereas consultants on the conservative or Republican side, well, they just seem to prosper in many cases. And while I don't think we should shoot all the consultants, I think there are a lot of unanswered questions as to how in the world they are judged and how in the world a party that believes in competition in business and in baseball and in all aspects of life somehow doesn't seem to apply that to political consultants as often as they should. Now, there's been some good work on this. Tucker's publication, the Daily Caller, the Breitbart websites, National Review, other publications have started looking at some of this. You, as the consuming media audience, should demand more of this, because unless we establish some accountability on what goes right and what goes wrong in politics, we are going to get the same thing that frustrates you, which is defeat. A couple of things from the 2012 election that I don't think are mentioned enough. We've all heard about the deficiencies with African American and Hispanic voters. Let me point out that the most precipitous decline in the Republican vote in 2012 was among Asian voters, and they are not insignificant. They are now 3% of the national electorate, and concentrated in some states that matter, such as Nevada and New Jersey. I have to tell you, this is a constituency that conservatives should be able to appeal to, and they have appealed to in the past. In 1993,
George H.W. Bush won the Asian vote. In fact, he won a majority of it in a race where he only got 38% of the vote because of Ross Perot. That was before we realized Ross Perot's trade table was not in its full upright and locked position. In 1996, Bob Dole lost to Bill Clinton badly, but he carried the Asian vote. Things have been on a decline ever since then, to the point that Mitt Romney managed to win only 26% of the Asian vote. There are pockets of Asian supporters in the Republican Party, Vietnamese, Filipinos, but with the exception of Nevada, where a full court press was made to appeal to the Asian voters, not only in English but in native languages, and also to appeal to them on the basis of educational choice and opportunity and small business. With the exception of Nevada, the Asian vote collapsed. Now, micro-targeting. We've heard from Michael Barone about the incredible efforts that the Obama administration did to go into micro-targeting. One example of how good they were at it. A friend of mine, a Democratic lawyer in Fairfax, Virginia, showed up to walk a precinct 10 days before the election. She was handed an iPad and a clipboard, and she was told, "This is the precinct you're going to walk." And she looked at it and said, "There are only 2 households on this." And they said, "That's okay, there are 4 voters in those 2 households." And she said, "But 4 households?" They said, "We've scrubbed this precinct. These are the last people left we think we haven't reached, and we've honed the messages based on their magazine subscriptions, what kind of car they drive, where they shop, whether they go to church or not, what kind of church. We have decided this is the message and this is the script you can use to appeal to these 2 households. And your job before noon is to go out and get those voters. And no one else. We'll give you another precinct in the afternoon." She went out and she found those voters. By the way, for some reason, they actually knew they were home. And she found them and she got the votes. That's micro-targeting. Harold Ford, former head of the Democratic Leadership Council, has said, look, of course Obama had a more powerful message, but he also was able to find voters in states like Ohio and Florida and Colorado that had never been found before. And we have to emulate that if we're going to have any chance of success. Lastly, there's one thing we do have to worry about. We are seeing an attempt to change the rules of the game. It's not just micro-targeting. It's an attempt to obliterate the voter registration system we have in this country and introduce even a greater element of fraud. Right now, all of the liberal groups are trying to push for something called mandatory voter registration. This would be a disaster. Of course we have an antiquated registration system. We have 2 million dead people. I don't support representation without respiration. We have 2.75 million people registered in more than one state. We have 1 out of 8 voter registrations that are inaccurate. The way to fix that is not to throw away the whole registration system and take everyone from a driver's license list, everyone from a welfare list, everyone from a property owner's list. That will increase the number of duplicate registrations dramatically, and it would lead to a complete mess, which is precisely what some people on the other side want, because out of that chaos can come confusion, and out of that confusion can come, mysteriously, more votes. Now, all of this is going to come together this November because we have off-year elections. And I will tell you right now, New Jersey looks as if Chris Christie is going to win a landslide election. That means the other high-profile race is going to be in Virginia. Virginia is going to be a very close election. The micro-targeting that Michael mentioned, that I mentioned, is going to be at play. I already know that in Richmond, there are already organizers going through the neighborhoods, contacting potential voters and making sure that the Democratic message reaches them. The message to you today is this. If you want to be competitive in 2016, the road back begins this November here in Virginia. If you win Virginia, just like you wanted in 2009 after Obama won, you're back. If you don't, here's what I fear. The biggest weapon the other side has is psychological warfare, imputing to you the belief that you can't win. It's time to give up. There's no way you can possibly come back. The way to come back is to win. The way to win is to absorb the lessons of 2012 and use them in 2013, and the best place to begin that is right across the river in Virginia.
Thank you, John. Well, the Pulitzer Committee makes a lot of mistakes, but every once in a while they just knock it right out of the park, as they did when they awarded the highest award in journalism to Michael Ramirez, who's personally my favorite editorial cartoonist in the country, and probably I speak for most in this room. We're honored to have him. Very smart about politics. Also runs the editorial page at Investors Business Daily, as you may know. Here he is.
If there's any college journalists out there taking pictures, be warned that there are Joe Biden staffers on both sides of the ballrooms. They may tackle you to the ground and force you to delete the pictures. I want to focus on three areas of the election dynamics: media bias, demographics, the Romney campaign, and the Romney candidate. How did an incompetent president and a reckless administration with a dismal record, remember when the White House was fumbling with the question of, were we better off? How did that administration get reelected? At 8% unemployment, the poverty rate increased from 39.8 million people to 46.2 million. Americans on food stamps increased from 31.5 million to 46.4 million. The median income dropped 4.1%. Families lost $4,000. Federal expenditures grew from 2.9 trillion to 3.79 trillion. The deficit climbed. Our national debt went up by $5 trillion. Gas prices went up from $1.84 a gallon to $3.84 a gallon. You got Obamacare, Solyndra, the first ever U.S. credit downgrade in history, the worst recovery in American history. So how did an administration has clearly demonstrated it is not capable of doing its job get reelected? Because of a mainstream media that continues to demonstrate on a daily basis that it is not capable or not willing to do their job. Media bias played an overwhelming role in defining the candidates and their message, and insulating the president from damage. Let me give you an example. Last week, the media reported that unemployment dropped to 7.7% and that 236,000 jobs were added last month. What they didn't tell you was that 296,000 people dropped out of the workforce. Investors Business Daily did. The mainstream media didn't tell you that 60.6% of Americans were working in 2009, but only 58.6% are working today. And the average is 63%. They didn't tell you that 10 million people have dropped out of the labor market, or that the long-term unemployment rate is higher today, almost 4 years after the recovery began. See, the mainstream media ignored these stories. They ignored Fast and Furious, and Obamacare is not a tax, and Solyndra, and shovel-ready jobs, and Obamacare will not increase your debt by one dime, that Obamacare will reduce your premiums by $2,500. I didn't turn down the Keystone Pipeline, the Republicans did, excluding lobbyists from policy-making jobs. I was surprised and disappointed over the release of the Lockerbie bomber. Citizens United will allow foreign corporations to spend without limit in elections. My mother was denied health insurance coverage when she was dying of cancer. Benghazi, and the most transparent administration in history. The media made the economy irrelevant. They overlooked the president's other shortfalls and defined Mitt Romney as a rich outsourcer out of touch with the average man who had to defend capitalism. And Romney did a poor job attacking Obamacare, attacking the president on issues and defending capitalism. And when he did, the media ignored him. Let's talk about demographics. It's been said that Romney lost by as little as 350,000 votes in the right states. The president got 61.7%, or 332 of the Electoral College votes, but the popular vote was much closer. He got only 51% of the vote, with only about a third of the eligible electorate weighing in. That comes to almost 66 million votes. Romney got 38.3% of the electorate, 206 votes of the Electoral College, and 47% of the popular vote, which was about 61 million. This is the first time an incumbent president has won re-election to a second term with less votes than his first election. The biggest problem in the election was conservative and Republican voters didn't show up to vote. Now, consider this for a moment. It only took 66 million votes to get elected president in a population of 315 million people. When you take the number of Americans living in poverty, 46.2 million, 14.4 million union members, 16 million federal employees, 20 million state employees, 50 million local government employees. Now, granted, being dependent on federal aid and entitlements, union membership, and being a government worker does not guarantee that you'll vote for one party, or even that you'll vote at all. But add environmental wackos, young voters, progressive issue groups, 660,000 more Hispanic votes, and you get the picture. It's not a steep hill to climb to get to 66 million votes. There's no question that there's a dynamic shift in demographics and that there's some outreach that conservatives have to make to accommodate it. But this president was reelected with less votes than before. And there's no question that a primary challenge hurt the GOP candidate. The over $2 million spent to define Romney in the main electoral states hurt his campaign. Romney suffered from being a rich person defending being a rich person. That's sad in a free market economy. I also think the lack of boldness and direct criticism of the president hurt Romney's campaign. You know, I no longer watch professional football. Instead, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. One thing the Dolphins are great at is taking a lead in the third quarter and playing defense until ultimately they lose the game. Mitt Romney had the lead after the first debate. He was competent, but much less aggressive in each stage of the following debates. You can't fight by the Marquess of Queensberry rules in a street fight, especially when the other side's not playing by the rules and they're tag teaming with the referee. The president and the media want you to believe that this re-election constituted an overwhelming mandate, but the reality is this is the first time an incumbent president has won re-election to a second term with less votes. And when you digest those numbers, the election merely preserved the status quo. The president received 62% of the electoral vote, and that may seem large, but only 51% of a third of the eligible electorate. That's not much of a mandate. We elected the same Republican majority in the House with the same Speaker of the House, and through the incompetence of several senatorial campaigns, we elected the same majority of senators with the same majority leader, Harry Reid. So I think what conservatives need to do are three things. You need to retake education, the institution of academia and higher education, where they transform education into social engineering and revisit history and revise it. Conservatives need to invest in entertainment and popular culture. They have to demand media reform. Conservatives need to be bold. They have a better argument and a powerful ally, the truth. Demand the truth and subscribe to Investor Business Daily.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, Michael. We've got 18 minutes and 14 seconds to mull over what conservatives ought to do next. And I was struck by, in all of your remarks, the lack of emphasis on the Romney campaign itself. Michael mentioned it. But I, just having covered the primaries, I remember thinking, you know, I like every person who's running. Super nice people. Happy to have them babysit my kids. I agree with all of them. But I remember thinking a couple times, hard to see any of these people getting elected, really. And I'm wondering, is there something the Republican Party is doing wrong in the way it goes about finding candidates?
I think one of the reasons that Republicans had a weak field, as I believe they did in the 2012 presidential election, is that it follows the implosion of the appeal of George W. Bush. Basically, from 2000 through 2006, Republicans and many conservatives kind of were loyal to Bush. They adhered to more or less the Bush program and public policies, including things like the Education Accountability Bill and Medicare prescription drug program, which some conservatives objected to and opposed. And I think there was a conservative case for voting for that bill and for legislating it.
I missed that one, but yeah.
Well, that's another panel. But basically, Bush's job rating really crumbled in 2005 as people watched on their TV violence in the streets of Baghdad and violence in the streets of New Orleans. And he never really recovered. Putative Republican presidential candidates who molded themselves in the Bush image ended up not running. People like Bill Frist and George Allen, who of course was defeated in Virginia in 2006. And the Republican defeats in 2006 and 2008 took a lot of potential candidates out of the field, like George Allen, for example. So I think you were operating in kind of a vacuum. I think that Republicans have prospects for a much stronger field of candidates in 2012, and that people in the CPAC audience will have heard from many, if not all of them.
I believe that.
At this gathering.
Congressman, is there something wrong with the process itself, though? I feel like I know dozens of pretty impressive conservatives who I think could maybe win a general election. Is there something deterring them from getting involved?
Well, I think if you look at the elections, both the national election, my own election, and in general elections, what the other side has taken to doing is to absolutely tear down that person personally. That's a tremendous burden when you ask someone to run for office, that they have to be willing to sustain that. And I think that discourages what our elections have become. Michael Bloomberg comes into upstate New York and invests $500,000 in my race. What does he care about upstate New York? And so to ask a candidate to subject themselves to that, I think goes to what we're seeing in terms of who is willing to take those hits. And, to Michael's point earlier, I think the Republican Party cannot be afraid of running someone who is a core conservative, who believes, who feels it, who breathes it, you can't just get up and spout that you are conservative and you believe in this country. It has to be more than that. It has to be something in your gut.
John, have you noticed that there's this, I always like Romney as a person. I like him now. I think he's a good man. But there has been, subsequent to the election, this reluctance to really do an autopsy on that campaign. Like, what went wrong? I mean, nothing personal, but Barack Obama just got reelected. So maybe it's time to think through what was wrong with that specific campaign and that specific candidate. And yet Republicans have this politeness instinct that often prevents them from being completely honest about what a totally mediocre effort that was.
Right, and whatever criticism there is sometimes just directed to the consultants, but ultimately the candidate selects the consultants.
Bingo.
Now, when you founded the Daily Caller, Tucker, I think you saw a need for a slightly grittier, more populist approach to covering Washington. I would suggest that the Republican Party probably needs a more gritty, more populist approach dealing with the electorate. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of strong conservatives out there who still pull their punches. I think after TARP and after the meltdown of the 2008 financial system and after Obama's failed stimulus, there was room for a candidate to come forward and say, the banks really have become too big to fail. We don't owe the banks anything. The banks are now dominating the economy, not the other way around. And I think that we should have gone after corporate welfare. And because Obama's Solyndra program and all of his other, favors to friends was the essence of corporate welfare. One of the things we know, and by the way, the Republican National Committee's own autopsy of the campaign is coming out next Monday. One of the things that was in an early draft of it was there were about 3 million blue-collar and pink-collar voters, people who are not professionals, people who have an AA degree rather than a BA degree, who didn't vote in this election or voted for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, or even a few of them voted for Obama again. Romney was the antithesis of a populist candidate. And I think that hurt. And I think not going after too big to fail, not going after the banks, not going after corporate welfare, sends a message to populist voters, this is the party of the fat cats, and we may say we're conservatives, but we're not looking out for you.
And by the way, you would be defending the free market if you went against
in the
crony
best
capitalism.
sense of the word. I mean, there's a difference. The most important thing Republican candidates need to do to appeal to the voters who didn't show up in 2012 is one thing: Being pro-business is not the same thing as being a conservative necessarily or pro-market.
Michael, when I saw your cartoon of the press humping the leg of Obama, probably the most evocative and truest image I have seen since I was at the Louvre, actually.
You know, I literally sketched it out on the floor of the Democratic convention and witnessed it every single day.
It's so unbelievable. That's the world I live in, and I can agree with you. I've seen a lot of leg humping in my time, and it's revolting. But it's also hilarious, your depiction of it. And I saw that, I thought, you know what? Maybe conservatives could get a sense of humor, too. That people sort of like it if you're not humorless and self-serious, no?
Well, let me tell you what the Democrats do that's very, very good. Redundancy, concise slogans. And it doesn't have to be about accuracy or the truth. You know, they have their leadership meetings early in the week. They figure out what the word's going to be, whether it's balance, whatever slogan it's going to be for the week. They repeat it like a mantra every single day until they get to the weekend and repeat it in the news shows. That redundancy, it's sort of like the urban myth. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. If it's repeated enough, if it's concise enough, it catches on and it becomes the truth. Republicans need to be, or conservatives, need to be more bold. They shouldn't be afraid to take the gloves off and point out the truth when you have an incompetent administration that's doing horribly. You know, anybody can drive down the street. Two of my favorite restaurants that have been around for 30 years closed down and see vacant buildings, vacant businesses. It's not wrong to point that out and say this is the reality. We need bolder candidates that are willing to do this. And, you know, John's entirely right. This is really the party, the GOP is supposed to be the party of free market, individual responsibility and liberty and freedom. They should focus on that and not have a barrage of infighting in the beginning on those very issues. I think that hurt Romney.
Yeah. So why are Republicans defending carried interest? Good question. Okay, so Michael, I'm required by law to ask this question. I know there are panels around the country on this very topic every day, but I just can't help it. I want to ask each person, do you have specific recommendations for the Republican Party to appeal to the many demographic elements you all mentioned who have been repelled by the party, black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, women, et cetera?
Let me just interject a word in defense of Mitt Romney,
Go crazy.
who I think had his good points in the campaign.
I like Romney. I'm not, you know.
The first debate, he showed up unannounced at Solyndra so that the press would not know about it in advance.
Yes.
That was a good campaign
Yeah.
day. I think he did about as well as, I think he did better than any of the other Republican possible nominees would have done who ran. But what do Republicans need to do? I think in part they need to show, and here I'd criticize Romney, more appreciation of people's human dilemmas and situations. Romney talked in the campaign about self-deportation. In fact, he was referring to a genuine phenomenon. I mean, the Pew Hispanic Center has somewhat reluctantly concluded that there's been net migration from the United States to Mexico on balance since 2007, since the housing crisis went on. So something like self-deportation is in fact taking place, but it's an abstract term, and it's a term that doesn't show any sympathy for the people involved. If you look at the, I'm a numbers guy again, you look at the Realty Track numbers on foreclosures in the period after the collapse of the housing market, 2007 to 2010, and you look at the counties where those are. They're Central Valley and Inland Empire in California, Clark County, Nevada, Maricopa County, Arizona. I estimate that about a third of those foreclosures were on Hispanics. They were people, in some cases, who'd been cajoled into getting mortgages by Spanish-speaking people, mortgage originators from Countrywide and so forth. Gee, we don't need no W-2s. We don't need no down payment. We're going to put you in this house for $350,000. It'll be worth $600,000 in a couple of years, and you'll have $250,000. Those people lost out. They had a dream. They may have cheated in some cases, but they had a dream, and the dream was shattered. Let's show an appreciation of how some people's dreams were shattered by bad government policy, not by the free market. And let's show that people, that we have policies that can help them choose their future and achieve their dreams.
So basically, if I understand what you're saying, it reminds me, and I don't think James Carville has ever been quoted approvingly at CPAC, but he did say one brilliant thing to me amidst a cloud of insanity once, many years ago, drunk on an airplane. And he turned to me, and these words have rung in my head ever since. He said, you know, if people think you hate them, they don't like it. And that appears to be kind of what you're saying. Congresswoman?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think what the Republican Party has to do is stop being fearful and afraid of uncharted waters and embrace, whether it's Latino or women, give them a place to go, give them a party to go to that is relevant to them. And just as Michael just said, you know, when you don't appreciate someone's plight in life, when you don't appreciate the fact that they are fearful that a benefit's going to be taken away from them, and explain to them, but if you don't make your case, we're not making our case to those communities, to women, and they're all looking for a place to go. They can't relate to Nancy Pelosi and Debbie Wasserman Schultz as a woman. We know women are looking for a place to go that understands health care, that wants to provide women with economic opportunities. But the party tends to be afraid and only wants to do what it's comfortable with. And that's, unfortunately, the old paradigm, which is, you know, the good old boys and the good old party. So,
Interesting. John Fund?
Some people are doing this right. Ed Royce, who's the new chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the House of Representatives, is from Orange County, California. Orange County, California was prototypical Reagan country. It's become a much more diverse place. There are 51 languages spoken in the public schools in that county. Everyone from Iranians to Ecuadorians now there. Ed Royce and some of the Republicans in that county have had active outreach there, and what they tell me is, you know, someone once said 90% of life is showing up. Most places in the country, Republicans and conservatives never show up at Minority Chamber of Commerce dinners. They never show up at citizenship ceremonies where people are sworn in and become new American voters. You don't show up. If you don't show up, they don't know who you are, and they can easily imagine you have horns. It's easy to hate people you've never met or never seen a representative of.
I find it easier to hate people I have met. Maybe that's just me.
Well, that's the
Well, this is
company you're hanging out
Washington,
with.
and it's full of particularly loathsome creatures in public
Maybe
life.
you're right.
But seriously, showing up and demonstrating that at least you care, you know, you'd be amazed at what just knowing 50 words of Spanish will do for someone, because of course you don't speak Spanish, but you took the time to say some pleasantries, which shows a matter of respect. It's a token of respect. Showing tokens of respect doesn't diminish you, it enhances the conversation or relationship between people.
Michael, you live in the county we were just talking about.
Yeah, I live actually in Orange County, but
Which is still Republican.
yeah, well, you know, I can say when I was at the LA Times talking about people hating you before they know you, I'd have to wear a Kevlar vest and a helmet just to get through the newsroom. I think this kind of outreach absolutely must be done. I mean, you look at the Hispanic community, and fundamentally, they're very family-oriented religious people. And I think that dynamic makes them conservative, a conservative opportunity. But, you know, I just think you need to stick by your principles, and you need to be bold. And look, if you have the media that's conspiring against you, where you can't have a fair fight, you have to demand more out of the media. And I don't know how to make that change. You know, when I talked about on a broader level the three solutions that I advocate, you know, progressives are very, very smart. They've taken over education from the bottom rung and up. And you know, in the United States, we lead the industrialized nations in reading and writing comprehension, science, and math up until the 6th grade. After that, we fall to the bottom of the level. I can't see why conservatives don't take on the education apparatus. It's doing a poor job. We have to import scientists and engineers with H-1B visas. And then the entertainment and popular culture. So they revise history, and they teach you how to live in the younger grades and through higher academia. And then they reinforce these values through entertainment and culture and popular culture. And then, on top of that, you have a media structure that reinforces these untruths and falsities, and you know, that becomes the truth. Conservatives need to develop more concise statements. They ought to use humor, and humor is a very powerful vehicle. I mean, that's what I do for a living as a political cartoonist. You know, Ronald Reagan once said, when he had editorial cartoonists, he told this joke about, you know, in the United States, political cartoonists can do cartoons on the President of the United States. In the Soviet Union, political cartoonists have to do cartoons on the President of the United States. It's a hilarious joke, but it makes a great point. Ronald Reagan was great at doing that. There's no reason why we can't incorporate this within the structure of campaigning that can reach a much broader audience with your message.
Tucker, I'll make one specific criticism of the Romney campaign. You know, small business people understand three things very well instinctively. They understand taxes, they pay them. They understand regulations, they have to labor under them. And they understand the need for economic opportunity to expand their business. The Romney campaign was approached by many people. You should reach out with a specific message to African American small business owners, Hispanic small business owners, Asian small business owners, and they chose not to take that up. I think it was a great lost opportunity because those people instinctively understand the message, and they're not primarily concerned with immigration or with racial resentments. They're interested in finding customers and keeping customers. And if you don't appeal to people and say, we have something that can be of specific use to you, and our message has specific resonance, and their message is frankly a message of 1% growth for the next 4 years, which means your business may have to close, we're leaving a lot of votes on the table.
Final word from either one of you?
Well, I would say that when Republicans go out and they try to energize any of these groups, they need to do it for the right reason. It's not to get their vote. It is because the way of the America and the way of this country is better for people. It lifts people up rather than keeping them down, what we're witnessing in this administration. And so when your motivations are pure, I think you end up, as Ronald Reagan said, good politics make for good policy, or good policy makes for good politics. And I think that's, they have to be sincere about what they're doing, not just do it for the vote, but do it because it's best for those people. It will lift them up.
Look to the states. We've got 25 states with Republican governors and legislators. We've got a lot of different public policy initiatives being taken by them. Compare what's happening in heavily Democratic states like California and Illinois, which are facing bankruptcy in different ways, with what are happening in other states where conservative policies are being done. And they're laboratories of reform. There are experiments that are working. Let's publicize them. Let's let our fellow citizens know about them.
This is California. This is Texas.
Say one thing, too. And look, selling the constitutional infrastructure that we had and this vision that our founding fathers put together, this nation that's extraordinary, should not be that hard to sell. And that is the conservative principles that I think we live by.
Mr. Mears, you have the last word. Thank you all very much, and thank you for indulging us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.